The earthbound spirit, the Yurai who cannot move. Yanaki Ishi. Translated from the record of the Kaiunenji Temple, Kakikawa Shinzaoka. Long ago, a pregnant woman was traveling the Seo no Nakama Pass on the Tokaido Road. A bandit discovered her on the road and wasted no time in taking both her life and her money. Blood from her body sprayed on a stone near the side of the road, and when night fell, the stone began to cry loudly enough that it could be heard by nearby villagers. The crying was repeated the next night, and the next, and finally some villagers summoned up the courage to go to the rock that cried so loudly at night and discover the source of the rock's anguish. They found next to the bloody stone a small baby who had been born from his dead mother's womb. Realizing that this child must have suffered great hardships, a priest from the local temple decided to raise him only on a sweet syrup called kosodati ame, from which it could become big and strong. However, this did not stop the crying of the rock, which still wailed in bitter anguish. So the priest moved the stone to the local Kaiunji temple, where it could watch the child, and placed an ofuda on it to make it blessed of Buddha. Finally, the stone was quieted, but it can still be seen at the temple to this day. The story of the futon of Totori, excerpted from Glimpses of Unfamiliar Japan by Lefkado Hearn. Many years ago, a very small yadoya in Totori town received its first guest, an itinerant merchant. He was received with more than common kindness, for the landlord desired to make a good name for his little inn. It was a new inn, but as its owner was poor, most of its doga, furniture and utensils, had been purchased from the futeya. Nevertheless, everything was clean, comforting, and pretty. The guest ate heartily and drank plenty of good warm sake, after which his bed was prepared on the soft floor, and he laid himself down to sleep. Now, as a rule, one sleeps soundly after having drunk plenty of warm sake, especially if the night be cool and the bed very snug. But the guest, having slept but a very little while, was aroused by the sound of voices in his room, voices of children, always asking each other the same questions. Ani-san, samokaro? Oyame, samokaro? The presence of children in his room might annoy the guest, but could not surprise him, for in these Japanese hotels there are no doors, but only papered sliding screens between room and room. So it seemed to him that some children must have wandered into his apartment by mistake in the dark. He uttered some gentle rebuke. For a moment only there was silence. Then a sweet, thin, plaintive voice queried close to his ear, Ani-san, samokaro? Elder brother, probably, is cold. And another sweet voice made answer caressingly, Omae, samokaro? Nay, thou probably art cold? He arose and rekindled the candle in the andon and looked about the room. There was no one. The shoji were all closed. He examined the cupboards. They were empty. Wondering, he lay down again, leaving the light still burning, and immediately the voices spoke again, complaining close to his pillow. Ani-san, samokaro? Omae, samokaro? Then For the first time, he felt a chill creep over him, which was not the chill of the night. Again and again he heard, and each time he became more afraid, for he knew that the voices were in the futon. It was covering the bed that cried out thus. He gathered hurriedly together the few articles belonging to him and, descending the stairs, aroused the landlord and told what had passed. Then the host, much angered, made reply, that, to make please the honourable guest, everything has been done. The truth is, but the honourable guest too much august sake have drunk, bad dreams has seen. Nevertheless, the guest insisted upon paying at once that which he owed and seeking lodging elsewhere. Next evening there came another guest who asked for a room for the night. At a late hour the landlord was aroused by his lodger with the same story, and this lodger, strange to say, had not taken any sake. Suspecting some envious plot to ruin his business, the landlord answered passionately, "Thee to please all things honourably have been done, nevertheless ill-omened and vexations words thou utterest, and that my inn, my means of livelihood, is that also thou knowest? Wherefore that such things be spoken, right there is none." Then the guest, getting into a passion, loudly said things much more evil, and the two parted in hot anger. But after the guest was gone, the landlord, thinking all this very strange, ascended to the empty room to examine the futon. And while there, he heard the voices, and he discovered that the guests had said only the truth. It was one covering, only one, which cried out. The rest were silent. He took the covering into his own room, and for the remainder of the night lay down beneath it, and the voices continued until the hour of dawn. "Ani-san, samokaro. Omai, samokaro." So that he could not sleep. But at break of day he rose up and went out to find the owner of the furuteya, at which the futon had been purchased. The dealer knew nothing. He had bought the futon from a smaller shop, and the keeper of that shop had purchased it from a still poorer dealer dwelling in the farthest suburb of the city, and the innkeeper went from one to the other asking questions. Then, at last, it was found that the futon had belonged to a poor family, and had been bought from the landlord of a little house in which the family had lived, in the neighborhood of the town. And the story of the futon was this. The rent of the little house was only 60 sen a month, but even this was a great deal for the poor folks to pay. The father could earn only 2 or 3 yen a year, and the mother was ill and could not work, and there were 2 children, a boy of 6 years and a boy of 8, and they were strangers in Totori. One winter's day the father sickened, and after a week of suffering he died and was buried. Then the long-sick mother followed him, and the children were left alone. They knew no one whom they could ask for aid, and in order to live, they began to sell what there was to sell. That was not much, and the clothes of the dead father and mother, and most of their own, some quilts of cotton, and a few poor household utensils, hibachi, bowls, cups, and other trifles. Every day they sold something, until there was nothing left but one futon. And a day came when they had nothing to eat, and the rent was not paid. The terrible Daikan had arrived, the season of greatest cold, and the snow had drifted too high that day for them to wander far from the little house, so they could only lie down under one futon and shiver together, and compassionate each other in their own childish way. "Ani-san, samokaro. Omai, samokaro." They had no fire, nor anything with which to make fire, and the darkness came, and the icy wind screamed into the little house. They were afraid of the wind, but they were more afraid of the house owner, who roused them roughly to demand his rent. He was a hard man with an evil face, and finding there was none to pay him, he turned the children into the snow, and took their one futon away from them, and locked up the house. They had but one thin blue kimono each, for all their other clothes had been sold to buy food, and they had nowhere to go. There was a temple of Kwannon not far away, but the snow was too high for them to reach it. So when the landlord was gone, they crept back behind the house. There the drowsiness of cold fell upon them, and they slept, embracing each other to keep warm. And while they slept, the gods covered them with a new futon, ghostly white and very beautiful. And they did not feel cold any more. For many days they slept there. Then somebody found them, and a bed was made for them in the Hakaba of the temple of Kwannon of 1,000 Arms. And the innkeeper, having heard these things, gave the 20 futon to the priests of the temple, and caused the kyo to be recited for the little souls. And the futons ceased thereafter to speak.